Welcome to this latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Home. My name is Paul Thomas, and this episode we are going to travel across the pond and discuss the European reaction to the recent American presidential election. Joining me on this episode, we have single panelist Christina. Christina, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much indeed.
The November 5th presidential election results caused quite a jolt in the American collective consciousness. Half the population is thrilled while the other half is horrified. Maybe by the end of this episode, you'll see which half I belong to. If you can provide an overall assessment of the collective European consciousness, Christina, how would you characterize how Europe feels how they felt when they heard Trump won the election? And feel free to share all the viewpoints that you know about.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say, obviously, I cannot speak for the whole of Europe because
Sure.
I'm German. So I think I can say a lot about the German viewpoint. And obviously, I read in the media about the viewpoint of different European politicians, for example. So I can give you that. I cannot speak for all Europeans. But what I want to say is that in regards to politicians, it's very different. The reaction was very different depending on what political viewpoint they have themselves. So you have, for example, Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary, also a member of the far right, if you will. And he was very pleased. He's a big Trump fan. So he was pleased, definitely. You have people like the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. She's also a member of the far right. Yeah, she was happy too. That is the one end of the spectrum. Then if you go to countries like France and Germany, it's a very different story. I read that the president of France, Macron, he congratulated Trump because that is what you do. If you have good manners, you congratulate somebody to that. But he also said that he wants to work together with the American government, obviously, but only, and I'm reading this, so I'm not getting anything wrong, but under the premise that their convictions are heard as well. So the convictions of the French, and not just Trump's point of view, because I think that is something they fear, that he only wants to do everything from his point of view and what he thinks is right. So
his self-interest as well.
His self-interest, yes. So Macron, the president of France, then apparently had a talk with our chancellor here in Germany, Scholz, who also congratulated Trump. It's what you do. But they feel like they should work closer together now, which is basically a way of saying we're not trusting too much in the relationship with overseas. So we have to work together closer in Europe. And I mean, France and Germany work very closely together anyways, but I think now they are maybe doing even more so. And they said they have to strengthen Europe because they cannot rely that much on the US anymore. That's the problem with Trump. He is very unpredictable. And that is something you don't want in a politician, not especially not in international relationships, you know. And I think that is the problem that they see, apart from other problems surrounding Trump and his government. But it's mostly that nobody really knows what to expect. That's a big problem. So that is what like politicians say, the heads of states. If we talk about economy, the European Union is worried, obviously, about the tariffs that Trump wants to implement. I mean, the European Union exports a lot of goods to the United States, especially Germany exports a lot. And that is a problem. And what David McAllister, a member of the European Parliament, said is that, well, if that happens, if the tariffs are implemented, the European Union has ways of fighting back in terms of trade. And if it gets to a trade war, which might happen, then both sides will lose. So we are aware that we will not gain anything from that. But I think it's also understandable that if we get tariffs, that we will do something similar. It makes sense. So that's the European Union in terms of economy. Now, if you ask, I would say, normal people, if I just talk to my friends here in Germany, we are not happy about the second Trump presidency. And I have to say, we were not happy about the first one either. It happened. We were a bit shocked. We didn't really believe that he would be elected, but then it happened. I wasn't surprised that it happened a second time because I thought it happened once. Anything is possible. It can happen again. But Trump is seen very critically here for his racist statements, for his behavior towards women, for his lawsuits. And as I said, he's unpredictable. He is undiplomatic, I have to say. And he seems not to care too much about facts, if I may say so. And these are all three things you definitely don't want to see in a head of state, especially the head of state of one of the most powerful countries in the world. So in general, I would say, there might be other opinions as well, but I think in general, the public view in Germany is a pretty negative one.
Well, that was pretty comprehensive. You covered the politicians, you covered the economists, you also covered the common people. So thank you for that. One of the things I remember about the rise of the Nazi Party in the 1920s, and I wasn't there at the time, but I'm talking as someone who studied history, was the strategy of passionately demonizing other groups such as the Jews, communists, blacks, Romani, the gypsies, etc. Here in Magaland, the same tactic was used in campaign ads describing immigrants as criminals, transgenders destroying girls' sports, and Democrats for allowing it all to happen. The most telling similarity emerged when Trump described everyone who disagreed with him as vermin. Does this historical recapitulation cause you any concern, or at the minimum, raise an eyebrow? You know what I'm referring to about the vermin thing, right? There were cartoons that were, showed the rats, equating the Jews, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was not aware that Trump said that
Yes,
about people. Yeah, I believe you. I'm just saying I did not hear that beforehand, but that is worrying. Let me first make something clear. I am German, and we are obviously very aware of the Third Reich and of Hitler and etc., everything that happened back there. And I would not compare Trump to Hitler. I want to get that out of the way because Hitler was a monster and he killed millions of people. And I don't see that with Trump. But on the other hand, I see parallels between the developments of the MAGA movement, as you call it. I assume that it means Make America Great Again. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it's called that now. It's referred to as the MAGA movement. And there are parallels between that and what happened in Germany in the 1930s. I'd say if you have problems in a country, the easiest way is always to find a scapegoat where you can blame everything on, or on which you can blame everything on. And for the Nazis, those were the political opposition, the socialists, the communists, the Jews. So they used them to blame the bad state in which Germany was on. And I think the MAGA movement does the same. They have a scapegoat, and that is the immigrants, as you mentioned, the transgenders or the woke left. I think
Right.
they are also attacked all the time. And so that I think that is very similar in these developments. The statement of Trump that you mentioned, I think is particularly worrying because in a free society, you have to have people who disagree with the head of state. It's called an opposition. It's a normal thing in a free society. You have an opposition. You have to have people to keep the government in check, especially the head of state, and that is the opposition. And if Trump basically calls the people who disagree with him vermin, it sounds like he would call the opposition vermin, and because they disagree with him. And then again, it makes me think that he basically says an opposition is not allowed. He doesn't say that specifically, but it's, where you go from that thought to that thought. And the first thing authoritarian politicians do is get rid of the opposition. That's what, again, I'm not saying Trump is like Hitler. I'm just saying I see if it were to come to that, calling somebody vermin and then getting laws in place to make it harder for them to get jobs in the government. It's a development. You know where I'm going with this? So
Absolutely. Sure.
even though I do not want to compare the two people with each other, I see things happening that are worrying. And again, if it sounds like he's trying to get rid of the opposition, that's extremely worrying.
Stay tuned because we're not even into the new government yet. That's going to happen on January 20th. But as far as, one being a monster and the other not yet being a monster, we have to see how that plays out before we come to any firm conclusion. Trump is always bragging about how being great friends with Putin is. Now that he is again going to be president in less than 2 months, what do you think about the war in Ukraine?
I think I'm using that word quite often now in this interview, but again, that is worrying because the Ukraine needs all the help it can get against Russia. I mean, we have to keep in mind it's not just a war, it's Russia that attacked the Ukraine. And obviously, Europe helps Ukraine, not just because it is the right thing to do. Politically speaking, the thought is obviously if Russia attacks the Ukraine and they might win, what would make Putin stop from attacking other European countries? So obviously it's like, okay, we support the Ukraine because it is the right thing to do, but also to protect ourselves. Now, the NATO and the European Union support Ukraine. And there are talks about if there should maybe be peace talks. I mean, the war has been going on for years now.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, peace is a good option. But the European Union also says if the Ukraine enters these peace talks, they need to do it from a position of strength. So they need support. Even if they want peace, they need support. And we will do that. The European Union does that. It would be a great thing if the NATO in general does that as well. And the United States being one of the most important members of the NATO, it would be great if it were to support the Ukraine as well. I mean, I think that was even a problem during the last Trump presidency. That he said the other European NATO members need to spend a certain amount of money on their defenses, on their armies, etc. And it was already at that time that Europe thought we need to get more independent from the United States. The United States were traditionally the biggest supporter of Europe, the biggest protector of Europe, and we were always very grateful for that. And maybe we depended a little bit too much on that. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we see that it is not a given thing. So we might become a bit more independent, but obviously we would prefer it if we still worked together very closely with the United States, within and without of the NATO. But yeah, it's hard to imagine the United States not supporting the NATO, or in this case, Ukraine. I mean, you don't know what happens. I heard that Trump said the first day he's a president, he will end the war between Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, he says a lot of things. It's one of the things I heard. Won't that be interesting to see?
Well, I mean, he likes to brag and he likes to lie, and that statement was clearly a combination of bragging and lying. So,
I mean, do I think it would be better if the war was over? Obviously, people suffer in war. But since Russia attacked the Ukraine, you cannot just say, okay, Russia, take the territories you want and do whatever you like. That would just be playing into Putin's cards. That cannot happen, which is why it's so important that we support the Ukraine. And I mean, as I said, the European Union and the foreign ministers of the EU try to do that. But yeah, I think I'm
okay.
repeating myself. Yeah.
No, you're telling it like it is what we need to hear. One of the things I noticed recently traveling through Germany on tour buses was the huge number of windmills and solar panels on roofs and farms, way more than in America, where half the population still thinks that climate change is fake news. Trump promised that his first day as dictator, and he actually used the word dictator, will
Oh,
include the
God.
mantra, drill, baby, drill. While the rest of the world seems to care legitimately about the issue of climate change, America, the world's largest contributor to carbon based emissions, clearly does not. Will our tiny blue planet soon become toast? Are you afraid about the climate change issue?
In general, I am, because I don't think that climate change is fake. I think it's real. Um, which does not mean that there are no people in Germany who think it's not real. I mean, that is something I guess you have everywhere, that certain people do not want to be aware of climate change.
Well, let me
Am
ask
I?
you this. Let me ask you:
Yeah.
Is that a prominent mindset among like a large portion of the
No,
population? Okay.
no, it is not. No, no, no. In general, people acknowledge that climate change is real. It's just a matter of what they're willing to do against it. And I mean, I have people in my, let's just say, extended family who say, yeah, climate change is a thing, but is there really anything we can do about it? And then is that too much what the government does? So that is like, but it's there might be even some people who think it's not real, but it's a minority. That for Germany. In regards to the United States, I think obviously that Trump's opinion on the matter is very unfortunate, to say the least. However, I have met so many Americans over the last 10, 20 years. And that is not just something I say, to be nice, because I am pretty honest when it comes to that. There were also a few not so nice people in between, but in general, all the Americans that I met were pretty open-minded. And I also saw a lot of documentaries about the United States where a lot of people try to do something about climate change. Would it be better if the government is on board with that? Yes, obviously, because the government can create laws that support that. You could be part of the Paris Agreement. Yeah, that would all help tremendously. But on the other hand, I think there are so many people in the United States who really want to do something. And I think that is not in vain. So maybe I'm too optimistic here. But America is not just, or the United States of America is not just Trump. It's so many people. So I think even without the government being on board, I hope that there is still a lot going on.
Well, we talked in an earlier episode about the business sense that
Hmm.
clean energy is. I mean, it just makes it's cheaper that way, and if you're going to be buying energy, you might as well buy the cheaper product
Yeah,
than the more expensive. So,
yeah, it
okay,
is. Yeah, no,
go
sorry.
ahead. No, no,
Yeah,
no.
I mean, it just makes sense. All the fossil fuels are finite. At some point, there's just nothing left, and renewable energy just makes so much more sense. And in Germany, I did not check that fact, but I heard from a friend who is in like a Green Party. She said that 80% of the money invested in energy at the moment in Germany is invested in renewable energy and not in fossil fuels anymore, which makes obviously the lobby of the fossil fuels or the companies there nervous, which is why they try to influence political parties again to work in their favor. I don't know how much is invested in the US, don't know the numbers there, but yeah, it makes more sense. But then with President soon to be again President Trump, it's not always about logic, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. Or what's beneficial for everybody else. It's not. Yes.
Or that, yeah.
Trump likes to break treaties. In his first term, he broke the Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated by the Obama administration, the Paris Climate Accords, which was negotiated with the Obama administration, the Trans Pacific Partnership Agreement, again, Obama had a big hand in that. You called it NATO. We call it NATO, but
Oh yeah, sorry,
NATO.
that's just
That's all right.
pronunciation.
That's all right.
The proper
NATO.
German pronunciation is NATO.
NATO. NATO
NATO.
has been the strongest military alliance in the history of the world. Do Europeans fear that the NATO treaty could be in danger? How strongly are you afraid of Trump? Now, the first time, Trump kept complaining about the European people or the European governments not putting a percentage of their budget into defense, as
Mm.
if it was taking money out of his pocket. And I don't really think
Mm.
he understood about the process involved in that, but he had plenty of complaining time on that. So this time it's going to be even worse, I believe. But what is your belief?
It's hard to say. Do I think the NATO could be in danger? Yes and no. The problem is you never know with Trump. As I said, he's so unpredictable. So he might be like, oh, I feel like not being part of the NATO anymore. And then, that could happen. On the other hand, it might not. We don't know. That's the problem with him. You
Okay, let
don't,
me ask you this:
yeah.
if Trump manages to pull out, is the European contingent strong enough to maintain a strong alliance?
That is hard to say because I do not know the numbers. So I don't know
Okay.
how much the United States contribute, how much each European country contributes. So I don't know the numbers. What I know is what I already said before is that the European foreign ministers are already of the opinion that they have to become more independent of the United States anyways. So what Trump does or does not, they know they have to act. So I think that they see the danger. If you ask me, do they see the danger? Yes, they see the danger, and they're trying to counteract it. Will we be able to compensate if if the United States pull out of the NATO? I don't know. I think we will do our very best, but I don't know if that can work financially. I'm not a foreign minister, so I'm afraid that is above my pay grade to answer that.
Well, I think they're what you're saying is they're preparing for it. They're
Yes, they
preparing
are.
for the worst case
Yes.
scenario. Okay.
I think there was even Switzerland, an article I read in a Swiss newspaper. They actually accused Germany of not being prepared enough for that. They said, you saw what Trump did during the last presidency. Now there were 4 years. You knew that it could happen again. You should have been better prepared by now. So yes, everybody sees the danger, I think.
Well, that's something for the Swiss to talk about. The Germans is not.
Well, Switzerland is so tiny and it's always neutral, so if Germany is the big brother, basically not in the book sense, but it's right next door and it is in the European Union, one of the strongest partners. So obviously if they want to blame somebody, it's Germany.
Yeah, wow. Switzerland has plenty of money. They could be forking
No,
over those
they
bills.
do, yeah. That they do.
The war in Gaza has been going on for over a year. It has extended into Lebanon and the West Bank. We have witnessed missile launchings from Israel into Iran, from Iran into Israel, and from Yemen toward merchant shipping as well as U.S. warships off their coast. What do Europeans think about what is happening over there? And what is your feeling personally about how the war has impacted the innocent civilians in Gaza?
Now, again, here I have to say, first of all, it's just my German point of view. And
Okay.
historically speaking, it is extremely hard for Germans to criticize Israel. You know why? We have, after the Holocaust, we worked very hard on having good relationships with Israel, etc. But the whole Holocaust, the Shoah, is still always in the back of our heads. So especially for politicians, it's very hard to say something negative. Other countries may do that. Germany has a hard time doing that. However, personally, if you ask me personally, the conflict in that area between Israel and the Palestinians has been going on ever since the State of Israel was founded. Of course, since basically, you can't say it otherwise. The Israelis took land from the Palestinians and formed their own nation, their own country there. Obviously, Palestinians were not in favor of that. So the conflict started right there. Now, it has been going on for decades, ever since that time. And what happened in 2023, the attack on Israel that started the whole war in Gaza, that the attack of the Hamas in particular, that obviously was an act of terror, and it was horrible.
Sure.
All the people died, all the hostages that were taken. Horrible act of terror. It is also, on the other hand, undeniable that Palestinians are oppressed by Israel. In Gaza, in the West Bank, I've seen actually documentaries of American journalists about the situation in the West Bank. And it's pretty awful. So the problem is it understandable that Israel fought back after the attack of the Hamas? Yes. Is what they are doing right now reasonable? If you can use that word in terms of war, but is it reasonable what they do now? I personally doubt that. Even as a German having a hard time criticizing Israel, I have to say it has been called genocide, not by me. I read that in the press because thousands of people die. They don't get the goods by international organizations that they should get. People apparently starve. And it was called at some point genocide. I mean, even Benjamin Netanyahu is now wanted by the International Court in Den Haag. So he is actually, if he sets foot on German soil, Germany would have to arrest him because we support the International Court in Den Haag. So that pretty much says it, I think. I don't want to seem like I don't want to talk about it in detail, but it's hard for Germans. But I try to give you as much of an opinion as I could.
Being conflicted is not a shameful thing. I'm very much conflicted. Hamas is a horrible organization, but I also feel that the Israeli response is equally, if not more, horrible.
Yes.
And which and the tens of thousands of Palestinians who were not involved in the decision to attack on October 7th, and their deaths. I mean
The
that lies
civilians, yeah,
that lies on both Hamas, who started it, and Israel for retaliating the way they have.
yes.
So I'm conflicted.
Yeah, and I mean it's not just us, it's also the people in Israel, that the regular citizens of Israel are conflicted about it as well. I have like over the last few weeks, there were professors from Israel in my local university where I teach. And it's not that they're all in favor of what happens there in Gaza. It's like they have their own opinions, and there are lots of people in Israel who are against it. Not talking about the obvious horrible things that happened before, but the way that war is now fought. Again, lots of people in Israel are against it. And I think even the opposition, I mean, Netanyahu is apparently, well, obviously he's the president, or is it a prime minister? I'm not
I think
sure.
he's prime minister. Prime
Prime
minister.
minister, but the head of state, like he is responsible for a lot for what is going on. So yeah, again, just like Trump is not the United States, or Biden is not the United States, it's also not Netanyahu, is also not Israel. Yeah.
Okay. On September 15th, 1935, the German Reichstag passed the Nuremberg Laws, which imposed restrictions on Jews regarding citizenship, marriage, and sex with non-Jews, the employment of German women under 45 in Jewish households, just to name a few of the items included. 2 months later, the restricted categories were expanded to include blacks and Romani, which are gypsies. Our viewers and many Americans may not be aware of the fact that these laws were based after careful study of the legislation in place for decades in America's Jim Crow South, which was considered by most racist bigots as the preferred way to keep the black population contained. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s were largely initiated by black veterans coming back from World War II after fighting to defeat fascist racist bigotry, and then came home to find it routinely normal in America. Racial segregation in the military was in place until 1948. There is a concern now that Jim Crow is on the way back. Since World War II, America has assumed the brand of the powerful champion of freedom, democracy, and individual rights. Is that brand still seen in Europe as legitimate or cynical propaganda?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have all my notes here and I seem to have left out something. Oh, there we are. Sorry.
Okay.
I wrote notes so I don't forget anything
All right.
important. Well, again, it's difficult and it's not difficult. I have to say that I think most of Europe sees America portraying itself as a champion of freedom as cynical nowadays. And it's different things. First of all, it's the latent racism that you find in the United States. I mean, we have also heard of the Black Lives Matter movement, the cases of George Floyd and Eric Garner. And also, that's one thing. The other thing is that it seems like the United States mostly intervene in international affairs if it's convenient for them. One example, the Taliban in Afghanistan. As long as they fought against the Soviet Union, they were fighters for freedom. I, I have a little anecdote there. I'm sorry. I need to throw that in because as a younger person, as a teenager, I was watching MacGyver, that TV show. Do you remember that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was one scene, I mean, it was shot in the 1980s, and there was one scene where actually, obviously it's a TV show, but there was a soldier, somebody higher up in the ranks of the army, who actually said to someone else, we should give all this money to the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, to the Taliban. And I was like, damn, that's how things change. As long as they fought the enemy of the United States, they were freedom fighters. But as soon as they switched positions and fought against the United States, they were terrorists. That's the one thing. Take Saddam Hussein, for example. As long as he was practical for the United States, he was tolerated, not necessarily supported, but tolerated.
Oh,
And
he was supported when he attacked Iran. He was our best buddy in the region when he attacked Iran.
yeah, and I have to say, also European countries supported him as well. I did some research on that. So yes, he was unofficially supported, not officially, but unofficially. But when he was not practical anymore, when he couldn't help anymore, suddenly he was the enemy and he was gone. I mean, that is something that we see. And I mean, politically speaking, it's something that I might not like, but it's a fact that governments need allies on the international scene. And sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your friend. I might not like it, but I think that is reality in politics, especially on the international scene. I don't like it, but I get it. The fact is that justifying it with a fight for freedom, that's the part that we see as cynical. I mean, if you're honest about it, if you say like this is how it is, he is fighting against, like Saddam Hussein is fighting against Iran, that's good for us. Yeah. The Taliban are fighting against the Soviet Union, that's good for us. Everybody understands. But to say, oh, no, 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 we have the moral high ground here. We fight them because they are against democracy. Come on. So that is why we see it as cynical. Yeah. And in a way, propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is this cynicism emerged gradually over time?
Yes,
Because
yes, yes, yes.
after the Marshall Plan had done a lot to rebuild Germany
Oh,
and a lot of Europe, America was, it was great. We had our
it's a
troops
recent
stationed over there.
development. Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's a recent development.
Okay.
And I would say a development over the last 20 years. Before that, it was different. Like I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the United States was always the country of the heroes. I mean, it's not obviously that's what we saw in movies and TV shows. Like the United States were the heroes and they were fighting the bad guys and they were doing the good stuff. And I mean, right after World War II, obviously, for us, that was the truth.
Yes.
The people that were liberated in Germany by the American troops, obviously they were so grateful. And Germany was grateful for a lot. Even today, I can say in 2024, then I'm immensely grateful that the United States decided to join the war and liberated Germany from the Nazis. Yes. And that went on during the 60s, 70s, even the 80s and 90s. And then after that, it gradually declined. And our view of the United States became more critical. And again, I'm not saying that about each and every individual American, because I have met so unbelievably open-minded, nice Americans. Like you're just one of them, but I've met a
Well,
lot.
thanks for that.
Yeah, well, it's just the truth. So I don't see every American in that critical way. I just think that the government of the United States, with like portraying it as if they are the heroes when it is very clear that they are just following their own interests, it's just, I don't know. I mean, if you could call it wrong, I mean, from their perspective, it's probably not wrong. They're justifying what they're doing, but it is not helping Europe seeing the United States in a positive way.
Well said. This is a long question. I have two real long questions coming up. This is a long one, so bear with me, please.
Of course.
I have a specific interpretation of history, which I will try to explain by comparing and contrasting two different wars and their aftermaths. The first is World War II, when the Allies convincingly defeated the Axis powers militarily and held the leaders accused of war crimes accountable with a legal proceeding known as the Nuremberg trials. Some that were held on trial were convicted and punished. Others were acquitted. Most importantly, the system of government the defeated nations assumed rejected the racist, fascist imperialism that resulted in nearly all the major German cities being bombed into rubble by 1945. Okay, that's the first one. The second example is the American Civil War. It also had a convincing military victory for the Union forces in 1865. However, unlike Germany, after World War II, the leaders of the rebellion were not held accountable with tribunals. The reason for this secession, protecting the institution of enslaving the black race, took on another form established at the end of Reconstruction in 1877, thus opening a century of racial apartheid better known as Jim Crow. During that century, statues of the rebellion's generals were erected throughout the southern states. Military bases were named in their honor. Terrorist organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan worked in conjunction with local police to hold ceremonial lynchings of black men where celebration picnic gatherings took place. It is my contention that the Confederates never accepted that they lost the Civil War and continued a society which enforced the political implementation of racial oppression. I also contend that their battle for white supremacy scored two major victories twice by electing Donald Trump president. That's my interpretation of history. If, Christina, you have an alternate view, please share it with our viewers.
Well, I'm not an expert on American history. I have to admit that. So I can see where your opinion comes from. Definitely. I mean, we know that the white supremacy is in favor of Trump and that it was, well, groups of that movement were part of the attack on the Capitol.
Okay, well, let me go back about
sorry.
your initial point. You're not a student of American history, but I'm talking about the accountability that took place with the Nuremberg trials, where the defeated generals were put on trial, and the lack of accountability at the end of the Civil War, where those generals were actually glorified with statues and had military bases named after them.
Well, I mean, it's always more difficult if it's right in front of your doorstep, right? I mean, if you have fascism overseas in Europe, and obviously the situation there was extremely bad, you have to hold them accountable. If it is people within your own country, it's more difficult. And again, I'm not an expert on the history that took place, the relationship between the North and the South during the Civil War. Should they have been held accountable for what they did? If just talking about moral standards, yes. But then that's the thing. Did they see that as a moral issue or a political issue? I mean, did they say it's the North against the South and the generals were just fighting the war? Or is it a moral issue? And
well,
apparently,
if slavery can be considered a moral issue.
Yeah, obviously. No. What I mean is, slavery was then abolished. after the war, after the Civil War, right? In the whole of the United States.
Mhm.
So yes, it was abolished. So obviously they saw it as a moral problem, as you should, and they abolished it. But then again, if you think about all the history, it wasn't even, again, I'm not an expert, but was it George Washington who had slaves on his own?
As well as Thomas Jefferson, as well as
Yes.
James Madison, James Monroe. The first five presidents, five out of the first six presidents were slave owners. Yes.
Yes. So if they were not seen then in a bad light because of doing that, maybe that was the justification of also the South that said, yeah, but it was normal until now.
Mhm.
Again, I feel not completely secure in that area because I don't know that much about American history. So I don't feel comfortable like talking about it in detail. Obviously, it is a moral issue and should have, maybe it's the problem that then all slave owners would have had to be held accountable. And could you have done that? That's maybe the same thing with denazification after World War II in Germany. They tried to get rid of all the Nazis in the government, in the administration, in the schools, in the universities. And they very soon realized that it wasn't possible. If you wanted everybody out of a job that held the party book, like who was actually in the Nazi party, they could not have kept the country going. So after a while, they gave up. They only held accountable the worst people, like the generals in the Nuremberg trials. And most of the other ones were whitewashed, sort of. Then if you go back and say, should the generals have been held accountable? Were they the ones owning all the slaves? I mean, again, it's difficult for me to say. I think in general, yes, people should be held accountable for these things. But I think it's probably the same thing as with the denazification. That's the only thing I have here.
So basically, you're saying that the denazification could only go so far because there were civil servants that were part of the Nazi regime that you
Oh,
needed.
so many,
Yes, in
yes.
local, especially in local governments, I'm sure.
Also, if you wanted to be a teacher, you had to be a member of the party. You could not be a teacher if you weren't. So
Mhm.
then after war, if you like basically had fired everybody, you would have had not many people left. So that is a problem that was then for a long time ignored and only became again very apparent in the 1960s, like 1967, 68, when the students revolted against that and said, wait a minute, we want to know who was a member of the Nazi regime. We want to know who was a member of the party because our professors might have been part of that regime and we don't even know. And that's when what we Germans call the Aufarbeitung started, when we started to actually work through all of that happened. I mean, that is something we nowadays praise ourselves that we do, but it was not right after World War II that started. It was actually at the end of the 1960s that really started. And
Well,
then,
right after World War II, Americans were kind of running the show over there.
oh yeah,
Uh,
they were, yeah.
more
What you
so, more
mean?
so than the German people had very little to say about how things were played out, and it seemed to me that the Americans had more to say in allowing those Nazi officials to maintain their status as civilian officials.
Yeah,
Um,
they did. And I mean, again, there were double standards at that time when it comes to the Americans, because I mean, they were more than happy to bring on over any scientists that had worked for the Nazis and then let them work in the United States, even
mhm.
if they had worked on very questionable projects. Or also, scientists from the United States were more than happy to take the data that Nazi scientists had gathered with, again, horrible, horrible projects. So I think that at the time, it was also done because of the Cold War. the impending Cold War. It was
Sure.
everybody wanted an advantage over the other side. But yeah, double standards there. And also then if you want to go back to the Civil War in America, then yeah, same thing.
I guess the bigger point that I wanted to make with this question was
Mm.
the fact that at the end of World War II, there seemed to be a lot less racial oppression of the Jewish population than there was the racial oppression of the black population after the Civil War. It turned out that between 1865 and 1877, the Union Army was pretty much in charge of the South. But whenever President Hayes withdrew Reconstruction and the Union troops had to move back, that's whenever the Confederates came back and took over, and that's what started Jim Crow. So I guess the
Mhm.
main point I wanted to make with that question was that because there was more accountability held in Germany after World War II, less accountability held in America after the Civil War, it seemed like there was more injustice that occurred in America than had in Germany. But that's just my view.
Yes, and I mean it is a valid view, obviously. And I mean you are an American. You know more about that than I do, but it seems logical what you're saying. If you
And
want,
I'm ashamed too. I'm ashamed of that particular part of our history, and the fact that the shame is transferring into this recent election because that's yeah.
what I will say here, like last comment, is that as I said, we Germans are very aware of what happened during World War II and the Third Reich, etc. It's taught in school again and again, so we all know. What I found interesting is what we don't think so much about is that Hitler, as you said, justified his politics by pointing at the United States. And I spent an exchange semester in Australia and found out there that Hitler had also justified it with the politics in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
because there was also like a whole lot of racism against the Aboriginal people going on, and as they called them, mixed children of both Aboriginal and white descent were taken out of their Aboriginal families against their will and placed into white families or organizations. And that is a quote now by the Australian government, to breed the Aboriginal element out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what Hitler also referred to, like when he was questioned in front of the Völkerbund, like the first before the United Nations, the organization. When he was asked how he justified what he did, he said, just yeah, look at Australia, look at the United States, they're doing the same thing. So why are you questioning me? Maybe you should question everybody. And that is kind of horrible for me because it is so obvious for us Germans that we were the bad guys, or that the Germans were the bad guys. And then it is quite apparent that these views were quite widespread in the world, which is interesting. And it is very sad that then if you talk about the United States, that the segregation was in place for such a long time. I mean, until when exactly? I think somewhere in the 1960s, is that correct?
Yeah, in 1965 there were two laws passed. There was a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act,
Mm-hmm.
back to back. One was 64, one was 65,
Mm-hmm.
and that was really the landmark. But the current Supreme Court is taking parts of the Voting Rights Act and shredding it, making making it more difficult to identify voter suppression or to stop voter suppression. So in certain places in the South, primarily, voter suppression laws are being enacted because the Supreme Court managed to gut that.
That is so weird for Germans to think about, because here the system is that obviously, like the government knows your address and your name. Like we have no problem with that, but everyone is registered. And we do have elections now, the coming February, federal elections, and you get a piece of paper by the government that says elections are on that date. You have to go to that place because, you know, we all have our districts where we go and vote. It is always on a Sunday, so everybody can go. You can also vote if you just send a letter, but you can go there in person. I like to go in person. So everybody is automatically registered. You cannot be not registered. That is such a system that is so weird to us that you have to register yourself, and that it might be hard for you to get to the election because it's a work day and you have to work, and like that is honestly, that is for Germans, that is a really weird system. Yeah, it's
Well, let me ask you this: are you obligated to vote? Do you have to vote, or
you're not obligated.
okay?
It's your
Okay.
choice. You can
Yeah.
or you cannot. And I talk to everybody and say, you don't have to, but it's your duty. You should
Mhm.
go. And
Mhm.
if after the election it does not go your way, you cannot complain. Don't even talk to me and complain, because you can go and you can vote, and it is your duty, and you should do so for democracy. So I love elections. I always go. And I don't understand if anybody does not want to go. It's a right you have, and you should look forward to go and vote. It's a brilliant thing. I mean, that's democracy is such a great thing. And it can be taken away so fast. I mean, that is something we saw in Germany. The Weimar Republic had one of the most modern constitutions at the time. Like everybody praised it as being so modern and forward thinking and liberal. And even though we had that constitution, Hitler got rid of it like overnight. So it can be taken away so fast. So I think it's a right and a duty to go and just vote is what we all should do. I mean, sorry, I'm getting kind of excited about that
It
topic.
didn't. It didn't even last 2 decades. The
Yeah,
Weimar Republic. I mean, it was before it was gone.
yeah.
Yeah, and there is definitely a concern that the United States experiment is in danger as well.
Mm.
We have an amendment in our Constitution that said the president can only be president for 2 terms, 2 4-year terms, and a lot
Hmm.
of people now are really worried that that is in danger. Okay,
That
got
is actually one of the notes that I have written down for later.
all right. Good. 3 more questions.
Yes.
Hitler's main vehicle in the propaganda mission was a newspaper, the Volkischer Beobachter.
Hmm.
Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. In America, the contemporary machine started with AM radio, led primarily by Rush Limbaugh. It gradually migrated to television networks, mostly dominated by Fox News, but also includes Newsmax, OAN, along with a number of smaller cable outlets. Under the radar, but a very prominent development, is that most of the local TV stations in America have been taken over by the Sinclair Group, which has been spewing out fascist editorials for years. Sinclair recently purchased the Baltimore Sun. The Trump information infrastructure has significantly overwhelmed all other opposing viewpoints. How important, in your view, is the role the propaganda machine plays in determining the political direction a nation takes?
Unbelievably important. Unbelievably important. I mean, that is something you don't only see in the United States. I mean, we are aware of like Fox News, etc. We know what's going on there. We have a bit of the same problem here in social media, because I was talking about the AfD, that far right party gaining more support over the last 2 years, and they dominate social media. They are extremely good at it. And I mean, I have no problem calling the AfD Nazis, because it's basically, they are so flirting with that whole scene that I'm just calling them as what they are. So they know about propaganda. The Nazis were unbelievably good at propaganda, and the AfD, this new party, is just taking that over. They are spreading misinformation on the social media, fake news. And that is one thing that I talked to a friend recently who is a member of a Green Party. I think I mentioned her before. And I said to her, you have to become better at that. Like the other parties, the government parties, but also the opposition parties, they have to become better at social media. They have to fight that misinformation. So just to say that we have sort of that problem here as well, although not to the extent of the United States, because it's not that certain media are totally supporting one or the other side. You have usually newspapers or magazines that are a little bit more to the left or a little bit more to the right, but you do not have like a whole system of media just supporting one side. No.
And you have those outlets you were talking about, a little bit more to left, a little more to right, but very focused on the truth.
Yes,
Not
yes,
really so
yes.
obsessed with lying in order to protect their brand.
No,
Or
I'm not, yeah, I think it's much easier in the social media to spread misinformation. It's not so easy to do it in the established media in Germany, like in the newspapers. However, there is one newspaper recently, I think it is Die Welt, the World, that has become questionable, to say the least. That is one thing. But yes, the media are unbelievably important in forming or in influencing governments and that. I mean, as I always say, I don't want to compare certain people with each other, but there are developments that are parallels between the 1930s and now. And I mean, the Nazi regime was very aware of how important propaganda was. There was even a propaganda minister that was
Goebbels.
Goebbels.
Yeah.
He was in charge of propaganda, and he specifically used the most modern media, like the radio at the time and cinema, that were his preferred ways of propaganda. He knew how important it was. He also choreographed the Reichsparteitage, like the yearly meetings of the Nazi Party in Nuremberg. He was in charge of that. It was like a big show. And he knew that that effect had on people. And then again, it's not exactly the same, but like the Trump rallies remind me a little bit of that, where the people gather and celebrate Trump as sort of a liberator, or I don't know what to call him, like in that.
God.
But they're all Christians. They cannot call him God. Wouldn't that be blasphemy? They're all such good Christians, aren't they? I mean,
Well,
sorry.
one of the things that I just heard a podcast today, they talked about the father figure that they said, Daddy's going to take care of everything now.
Yeah.
Wait till January 20th. Daddy's back. He's going to take care of everything now for us.
And that is also like a parallel I see. I mean, there is actually the word Führerkult, like a cult that was created around Hitler as the leader of the country, as the Führer, as the one who took care of everything, a godlike creature. Like the Nazis were not in favor of religion, by the way, so he was actually portrayed as sort of a godlike figure. And I heard in a lot of reports about Trump and this MAGA movement that they have sort of they created sort of a cult around him. That is what I read. And
we've been
then
speaking on that for a long time. That the
yeah,
Republican Party has become the cult of Trump. Yes.
which is sad because I remember still Republican politicians that were like how do you say, decent human beings. Like I remember
As
no, no,
opposed
no, no,
to
no.
cruel human beings. Yes.
I
Yes.
mean like I remember during who was it? Like John McCain. John McCain was he once
Yes, he
running
was a
for president?
Republican. Yes.
Yes, and he was running for president, right? And he was
Yeah.
running against Barack Obama.
Correct.
Yes. So then it was him, where during like a rally, somebody got up and said, yeah, yeah, and Barack Obama, he's a Muslim and he's like an enemy to the country. And John McCain took the microphone from him and said, no, sir. No, he's not. he is not either. There's nothing wrong with being a Muslim, but he's not. But also, he's not an enemy of the United States, and that is. With that, you can work as long as everybody supports the democratic system and is trying to be decent. But it's hard to see that with Trump.
It has vanished from our political phenomenon. It is vanished. There is no longer any decency or any decent treatment of the other side. So, yeah. All right, two more questions.
Say it.
Making out okay here? On
Yeah.
August 30th, 1934, the oath of allegiance all German government workers, including the military, took when assuming their new jobs became an oath of loyalty and obedience to Hitler only. It appears that loyalty to the alpha male is an earmark of totalitarian societies. We just talked about this earlier, this past question.
Mhm.
As the new American government is being formed, is this a fair comparison to make? I know you don't want to compare Hitler and Trump, and I seem to like to do it a lot, but this oath of allegiance thing,
Yeah.
the loyalty to Trump is a prerequisite to be any member of the administration or being considered other than vermin.
I can see what you're getting at, but I will still separate it because the oath of allegiance was something that the employees of the government had to do to be able to still work. So they had to do it. I don't see that in the United States, maybe yet. So far, I can see what you mean with loyalty. Like there are people, or basically the people around Trump know that they have to be loyal to him to get certain jobs and positions. If you're not loyal to him, you won't get that. And I have heard of politicians who were against Trump beforehand, and they changed their position radically to get to a certain position within his government. I forgot the name, I have to admit, but I heard about it. So yes, loyalty is extremely important. But on the other hand, I also heard that there are judges who were appointed by Trump, but oppose him in certain matters. For example, when it's the pardoning of people who stormed the Capitol, like there were judges who were appointed by Trump, but are saying, no, that's not okay, and they are against him. So I think there's still a balance there. I think people still think for themselves, at least part of them. So I don't see something like that oath of allegiance yet. Could you get there? Well, if you are at that point, then I'm sorry if I have to use that phrase, but then the shit has hit the fan, as you say in the English language. So let's hope you don't get there.
We'll see if we are there.
It's steering towards that, yes.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say personally, I don't think, no, not yet, no.
Okay, I love your optimism. The next 4 years and the system of leadership succession in America will give us a pretty good indication of whether the world will devolve into an Orwellian dystopia or not. Any predictions on how that's going to turn out?
Well,
you're allowed to be optimistic. You're allowed. To
I am optimistic, but I'm not an idiot. I do see things as they are, and while I am optimistic and I hope for the best, I do see the second presidency of Trump. I see that it is problematic, to say the least. I do see that. And I think that negative things are bound to happen. We don't know because it's so unpredictable. So regarding the NATO or the European Union, the tariffs, whatever, we don't know yet, but negative things are probably bound to happen. On the other hand, and forgive me for being there optimistic, I do believe to a certain extent in the American people and their love for freedom. That is what I hear always from Americans. Like, it's the land of the free, and they defend their constitution and their rights. That everybody is so focused on their personal rights. And that is why I hope that this is so deeply ingrained in the American people, in the citizens of the United States, that I hope it will not get too bad. Can it get bad? Yeah. If you get to a point, we talked about this, if you get to a point, and I think you will, where Trump pushes for a third presidency, that will be the turning point. If he can make that happen, if the American people will go along with that, then you have a problem. If he tries to do that, change the Constitution, and there is an uprise, and people say, no, you cannot do that, then you have won. But I think this point I think that will come, where he tries to push for that, and then we have to see what happens. This is what Putin did.
And Xi in China did it too.
This is, and probably, I'm not sure, but probably Erdogan in Turkey and Orban in Hungary. It's what the first thing that happens, you try to keep yourself as head of state, whatever you have to do, how much you have to change the laws. And if you can just say, no, the Constitution is sacrosanct, you cannot change that, then I have hope. That is what I think. I think you will have that problem at some point.
It is good to have hope. Yes.
But you will have to fight that. But as I said, I have met so many unbelievably nice Americans with a good heart who are not. That is always the thing. Yes, 50% of the people approximately voted for Trump. 50% of the people did not. Like, it's half of the country. Like, you are not alone.
No, I'm not.
See?
It's always good to end on a hopeful note. Christina, thank you so much. I know my producer, as well as myself and our viewers, are thrilled that you were able to join us for this discussion. And all you out there in Cyberland, thank you for listening. And until next time, bye now.